I'm going to start with something embarrassing. 3 weeks after Mark stole everything, the code, the money, my identity, all of it, I drove back to our old apartment building in Portland and sat in the parking lot for 2 hours. Just sat there, engine off, watching the light in our old window on the 3rd floor. Someone else was living there by then. You could tell because there were different curtains. Yellow ones, cheerful, the kind of curtains a normal person hangs. Mark and I had never gotten around to curtains. We used a bedsheet safety pinned to the rod. I thought it was charming. I thought a lot of things were charming that were actually just signs of a man who didn't intend to stay. I don't know what I expected to feel sitting there. Clarity, maybe? Rage? Something useful. What I felt was, I miss him. I know. Before you close this and decide you have no patience for a woman like that, I know how it sounds. But feelings don't ask permission, and grief for a person who destroyed you is its own specific humiliation that nobody warns you about. You can understand completely, intellectually, that someone is a sociopath, and still feel their absence as a physical thing, like a tooth pulled. The space where it was keeps getting touched by your tongue. I sat in that parking lot and I cried so hard I made myself sick. Then I drove to a 7-Eleven and bought a Gatorade and a bag of pita chips because I hadn't eaten in about 18 hours and my hands were shaking. That's where I was, 3 weeks after the worst thing that ever happened to me. Not on a bridge contemplating purpose, not furiously rebuilding. In a 7-Eleven parking lot at 11 p.m., eating pita chips alone in a Honda Civic with $63 in a checking account and nowhere to be in the morning. I'm telling you this because everything I've ever read about betrayal skips this part. It goes straight from the devastating moment to the turning point, the mentor, the revelation, the decision to rise. Real life has a lot more 7-Eleven parking lots between those two things. Real life has weeks where nothing happens except you trying to survive the next 24 hours, and sometimes failing even at that. So, let me tell you what actually happened. Let me back up. I met Mark Ellison in the computer science library at Portland State during junior year. He was reading Camus, not for a class, just for himself, which I found insufferably attractive. He had this quality of complete stillness. Most people, when they're doing nothing, look like they're waiting for something. Mark looked like he had arrived somewhere. I was 21 years old, and I had been building the skeleton of Nexus for 8 months. It was a security platform. I'm not going to over-explain the technical side because that's not the point. Designed for small businesses that couldn't afford enterprise-level data protection. I was good at it. I had been coding since I was 13, self-taught, the kind of kid who spent summer breaks on forums instead of outside because the forums felt like they led somewhere. Mark didn't code. He talked. That was his skill. An almost supernatural ability to make people feel understood. To make whatever room he was in feel like the right room to be in. He said things like, "You think differently than everyone else." And he said them with this specific quality of attention, this complete focused stillness that made you feel genuinely seen rather than flattered. I was not stupid. I want to be clear about that, because stories like this often imply that the woman was naive, soft, easy to fool. I was a 3.9 GPA computer science student who had already won 2 regional hackathons. I was not naive. But I was lonely. I had always been a little isolated. The girl who was better with code than people, who didn't quite fit the rhythms of normal social life. And Mark was the first person who didn't seem to want me to be different. He seemed to find the exact shape of me fascinating. That feeling is a drug. We moved in together after graduation. I worked the coffee shop mornings and the coding gig at night, and poured everything into Nexus. Mark said he was doing business development, and there was enough plausibility to it that I didn't push too hard. He had meetings, he had calls, he had a confident explanation for everything. The video games until 2 p.m., the networking events, the way money sort of drained away without any obvious explanation. I filed all of it under, this is just who he is, and I love who he is. I gave him access to everything. The shared bank account, the code repository, because he said he needed to show technical specs to potential partners, the email login, because we shared an account for some of the business correspondence, and it was just easier. Looking back, I can map it precisely. The exact moment each piece was handed over, and when he probably started using it against me. But I couldn't see it then. That's the thing about systematic theft. It doesn't look like theft from inside it. It looks like partnership. It looks like trust. It looks like love. The investor meeting. The pitch. Sandra Webb. I had chased her for 4 months. Emails, cold calls, a mutual contact who had to be asked twice. She was a serious player, well-regarded, the kind of investor who took meetings in her car between other meetings. When she finally agreed to sit down with me, I spent 2 weeks rebuilding my deck from scratch. I practiced the pitch 40 times. I timed it with a stopwatch. The night before, I barely slept. Mark made dinner, pasta, which he was actually good at, and he refilled my wine glass and said, "Tomorrow, you change your life." He looked at me with that exact expression, the complete attention, the stillness. I remember thinking, whatever else is complicated between us, this is real. This, right here, is real. I've thought about that moment many times since. He drove me the next morning. It was raining, the specific Portland rain that isn't quite rain, just the air being wet. I was in the passenger seat going over my notes. His phone rang. He glanced at the screen and declined it. It rang again. He declined it again, and this time I noticed something. A very small thing, the kind of thing you only see in retrospect. His jaw tightened. Just slightly, just for a second. The third time it rang, he answered it. And whether he fumbled it or did it deliberately, I will never know. But the call came through on speaker. A man's voice, speaking fast, English but with a Singaporean accent. "The transfer completed, but some of the authentication modules have errors. Is the original dev available to—" Mark ended the call. He didn't look at me right away. He looked at the road. And in those 3 or 4 seconds, watching his profile, I understood something. Not everything, not the full shape of it yet, but something. "Mark," I said. My voice was strange, too flat. "Who was that?" "Wrong number." "That wasn't a wrong number." He didn't answer. "Mark, who was that?" He pulled over, not dramatically, just calmly, signaling, pulling to the curb the way you pull over to make a call or check your GPS, completely normal movements. And then he turned off the engine. "I need you to listen to me," he said, "and I need you to stay calm." He told me in a completely level voice, the repository, the Singapore firm, the pitch I would not be making because there was nothing left to pitch. 6 months of planning. He said it the way someone reads off a grocery list, item by item, no particular emphasis, watching me the whole time. I don't know what I expected. Guilt, maybe? Defensiveness? Some version of the Mark I knew, even an ugly version. what I got was a stranger. A complete stranger who had been wearing Mark's face for 3 years. I got out of the car. I don't know why. My body just decided. I was standing in the rain on a sidewalk in my good blazer and my interview heels, and I had absolutely no idea what to do with myself. He drove away. He didn't say anything else. He just drove away. I stood there until I realized I was getting soaked, and then I walked half a block to a bus shelter and sat down on the bench. A man at the other end of the bench looked at me once and then looked away, which is what people do in bus shelters when someone is clearly coming apart. I sat there for 45 minutes. Then I called Sandra Webb to explain that I was going to be late. She laughed, not loudly, just a small, knowing, entirely cold laugh. "Honey," she said, "don't bother." Here is what the next 6 weeks actually looked like. I went back to the apartment because I had nowhere else to go yet. Mark was already gone. He'd taken most of his things while I was at the bus shelter, which means he'd had someone ready, a bag packed, a plan. That level of preparation. While I was sitting in a bus shelter in the rain, he was efficiently removing himself from our life. What he left behind? Most of my clothes, because they were mine and useless to him. The bedsheet curtain, safety pinned. A sticky note on the counter that said, "Sorry, Lena." 2 words, with a period, like a sentence he'd bothered to close. I called my mom. This was the call I'd been putting off because explaining it, all of it, the full shape of it, felt impossible. She picked up on the second ring, and I started talking, and about 30 seconds in, I started crying. And then I couldn't stop. My mother is not an emotional woman. She's practical, Midwestern, the kind of person who responds to crises by listing steps. But she just let me cry. For a long time. She didn't say anything, just stayed on the line. When I ran out of crying, she said, "Do you have money?" "Not really." "Do you have food?" "Some." "Are you safe right now?" "Yes." "Okay," she said. "Then we'll figure out the rest." I stayed in the apartment for 2 more weeks, which was the end of the month. The lease was in Mark's name, which I had never thought about because why would I think about it? And the landlord, a weary man named Gerald, who I don't think enjoyed any aspect of his job, told me I had until the 31st. I applied for 3 jobs, got interviews for none. I found out about the credit cards on a Tuesday when my debit card was declined at the grocery store. I had to put back the yogurt and the soup I'd chosen and stand in the checkout line rearranging my basket in front of a bored teenager running the register. I bought crackers and peanut butter and the specific brand of off-brand ramen that comes in the big bags, and I walked home in the dark carrying it in a plastic bag, and I thought, this is happening. This is actually happening to me. I want to be honest about something. I was not brave in this period. I was not building rage fuel or formulating a plan. I was mostly just getting through days. I slept too much. I cried at random things, a commercial, a song, the specific smell of coffee that reminded me of the morning shift at the cafe when my life had still been intact. I sent Mark 3 emails. I am not proud of this. 1 was angry. 1 was confused. 1 was, and I can barely write this, asking if we could talk. He didn't respond to any of them. On the 28th of the month, I loaded my clothes into the Civic and drove out of Portland. I had $400 in cash, a full tank of gas, and my aunt's address in rural Nevada, which she had given me years ago with the offhand generosity of family members who say, "Anytime," and mostly mean it, but have never actually been tested. I tested her. She opened the door at midnight, took one look at me, and said, "You look terrible." "I know," I said. "There's a pull-out in the basement. The hot water takes a minute." She never once asked me to explain myself. I don't know if she somehow knew, or if she just had the wisdom to understand that what I needed wasn't questions. But she just let me be there. She fed me, she left me alone, and slowly, not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly, the way a plant grows when you stop stepping on it, I started to come back. I need to tell you about the low point. Not the parking lot, not the bus shelter, not the crackers and peanut butter weeks. The actual low point was different, smaller, and in some ways more terrible for being so ordinary. It was 4 months after Portland. I was in Nevada. I had gotten a job at a call center in a business park off the highway. $8 an hour, headset, a script for handling billing disputes. I was good at it because I am good at reading people when I'm paying attention, and I had nothing to do but pay attention. One afternoon, I was on a 15-minute break in the parking lot, eating a sandwich from the vending machine. A car pulled in next to mine. A woman got out, maybe my age, maybe a little older, in a blazer, carrying a laptop bag. She was on her phone, talking fast, laughing at something. She had the specific energy of someone who is running late for something important and finds it exciting rather than stressful. She went inside. I sat in my car and finished my vending machine sandwich, and I thought, with a clarity that was almost peaceful, that was me. That was supposed to be me. Not bitterly, just factually. I had been that person. I had had that energy. I had carried a laptop bag with things in it that I'd built with my own mind, and I'd walked fast because I had somewhere to be. And now I was 32 and eating a vending machine sandwich in a Nevada parking lot because a man I loved had decided my life was a resource he could extract from. I threw the rest of the sandwich away. I went back inside. I put the headset back on. I did not do anything dramatic or significant. I just kept going. That is most of what survival looks like. Just kept going. Day after day of kept going, which is not inspiring but is the actual truth. The thing that changed me was not a revelation. It was a skill. At the call center, I started paying close attention to the people who called in, claiming they hadn't made purchases, hadn't authorized charges, didn't recognize accounts. Some of them were lying. You could hear it. The specific vocal quality of someone constructing a story while they're telling it. But some of them were genuine victims. Identity theft, account fraud, the quiet, systematic stealing of someone's financial existence. I started asking questions beyond the script. My supervisor told me twice to stay on script. I stayed mostly on script and asked the additional questions anyway, because I was curious, because I recognized these people, because I was one of them. After 6 months, I applied to work at a PI firm in Reno that was advertising for an office assistant. I did not have PI experience. I had a computer science degree and a very convincing cover letter. The man who ran the firm, a former insurance investigator named Dale, who wore short-sleeved button-downs and ate sunflower seeds at his desk all day, hired me on a trial basis. Within 3 months, I was doing more than filing. Dale let me sit in on client consultations. He let me look over case files. He was not a generous man by nature, but he was a practical one, and he quickly understood that I had a specific skill. I was very good at looking at digital trails. Not hacking, nothing illegal, just reading. Understanding what data left behind when it moved, what patterns looked like when someone was covering something up, where the lies showed in the record. I spent 2 years there. Then I went back and finished something I should have finished years before. A master's degree in cybersecurity. Online, paid for by working full-time and taking out loans I very carefully read every word of before signing. I started my own firm at 31. Just me, a laptop, and 3 clients from my Dale connections. Forensic IP work, helping companies figure out who had stolen what. I was good at it, for obvious reasons. By 33, I had a team of 6. By 34, 12. By the time I was 35 and we had moved into an actual office in San Francisco, I had built a company that was doing real work and real revenue, and I had done it without a single shortcut, without anyone's money but my own, without giving anyone keys to anything. I was also, the whole time, keeping a file. I want to be careful about how I describe the file. People hear, I kept a file on the person who wronged me for 5 years, and they picture obsession, a corkboard with red string, a woman consumed by revenge, letting hatred curdle into the center of her life. It wasn't like that. The file was more like ongoing documentation, the way you keep a receipt, not because you're certain you'll need it, but because you might, and you're not going to be caught without it again. I knew Mark had launched Apex through the Singapore connection. I knew it had succeeded. The product was good because the underlying code was good, because I had written it. I watched Apex from a distance, the way you watch a weather system on the horizon, not alarmed, just attentive. When he partnered with Sandra formally, publicly, when they announced an engagement that made a couple of tech blogs with headlines like, Power Couple launches Apex 2.0, I felt something. I want to be honest about what it was. It wasn't rage. It was a very specific, very ugly shame. The kind that comes from seeing the person who ruined you thriving and realizing that the world has not, in fact, corrected itself. He was fine. He was happy. He was on tech blogs with a woman I had once called from a bus shelter in the rain. I cried that night. I'm not ashamed of that. I was allowed. Then I added the articles to the file and went to bed. Here is the hidden thing. The part that changed everything. In my forensic work, I got a contract from a company that was in a dispute with a former partner over IP theft. Standard case. I'd done 30 like it. But this one was based in Singapore, and in reviewing the chain of custody on the stolen code, I found something familiar. Not similar, familiar. In the specific way that your own handwriting is familiar. I looked at the code architecture for a long time. Then I looked at it again. Then I called a former colleague, a woman named Ro, who'd been in my CS program and who I trusted completely. And I sent her the files and asked her to look without telling her why. She called me back in 2 hours and said, Lena, this has your fingerprints all over it. The error handling structure, the authentication logic, this is how you write. It was Nexus. Apex was Nexus. I had known that in a general sense, known he'd stolen the code, but seeing it in a professional forensic context, with the kind of documentation you can actually use, was different. And here is what made it more than a personal grievance. In the process of my investigation, I found something that had nothing to do with me. Evidence that Mark and Sandra had been misrepresenting Apex's capabilities to enterprise clients. claiming security certifications the product didn't have, which had left several of those clients exposed to breaches they'd been told couldn't happen. There were 3 documented incidents, real companies, real data losses, real people affected. This was not about me anymore. I sat with that for a few weeks. Because I want to be transparent with you, I had to separate out my motivations. I had to be honest with myself about what I was doing and why. Was I doing it for those clients? For justice? Or was I doing it for myself and just framing it in a way that felt righteous? The answer, if I'm being completely truthful, both. Both can be true. You can be doing the right thing and also want it very much for personal reasons. I don't think those cancel each other out. I think pretending you're purely motivated by justice when part of you is deeply, personally invested is actually more dishonest than admitting both are true. So I admitted both were true. And then I did it anyway. I contacted the SEC. I was not the only person withstanding. 2 of the defrauded clients had already filed complaints. My documentation added to an existing investigation, rather than starting a new one. I provided the forensic analysis of the code, the chain of custody tracing Nexus to Apex, the original repository access logs, which showed, with terrible clarity, a login from Mark's personal machine at 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, months before the pitch. The server logs were the cleanest part. He had used his own IP address, not a VPN, not a proxy, his home internet, because he hadn't thought he'd need to hide it, because he had been so certain I wouldn't figure it out. That detail, the carelessness of it, told me something I found sadder than the theft itself. He hadn't thought I was worth being careful about. He had taken my life's work using his home Wi-Fi because it didn't occur to him that I'd become someone who could trace it. That was the mistake people make when they decide who you are and stop updating. The federal investigation took 14 months. I want to skip to the end the way stories always do. But 14 months is a long time, and it was not a clean process. There were lawyers. There were depositions where I sat in a conference room while Mark's attorney tried to suggest that the code overlap was coincidental. There were days when I thought it was going to fall apart, when I thought he was going to walk away with it again. He didn't. Sandra cooperated with prosecutors to reduce her exposure. When she did, she handed them Mark. The email she provided included one in which Mark had written, in plain language, a breakdown of how he planned to remove me from the IP and what he planned to do with the proceeds. It was thorough. It was organized. It was the work of someone who had thought about it very carefully for a long time, while sleeping next to me. Reading that email, in a document submitted to a federal court, was one of the stranger experiences of my life. Not enraging. I'd expected to feel rage. What I actually felt was a kind of cold, clear sadness. This was premeditated. Not a moment of weakness, not an opportunistic decision. Planned. He had planned it while making dinner. He had planned it while filling my wine glass the night before the pitch. He had planned it while telling me I was going to change my life. Mark received 7 years for wire fraud and identity theft. The life insurance policy, which I hadn't known about until it surfaced during discovery, added civil liability that effectively bankrupted him. Sandra received 18 months. I was not in the courtroom for sentencing. I thought about it. I considered for a while that I wanted to be there, that I needed some version of the moment where our eyes meet across the room and he sees what I've become. But when it actually came to it, on the day of, I was in my office in San Francisco. I had a meeting at 10. I had another at 1. I had a team of 12 people who were working on cases that mattered, who needed me present and functional. I found out he'd been sentenced via a text from my attorney. 7 years. Thought you'd want to know. I read it. I put my phone face down on my desk. I finished the report I'd been writing. Then I went to the window and looked at the city for a while. The way the light sits on San Francisco in the late afternoon, low and golden, the way it makes even the ordinary parts of the city look like they're about to mean something. I thought about Mark reading Camus in the library, the holes in his sweater elbows. I thought about a bedsheet safety pinned to a curtain rod. I thought about a vending machine sandwich in a Nevada parking lot. I thought, I'm still here. I'm still here, and I'm still here, and I'm still here. I have the company. I have the work. And this matters more than it might sound. Doing the work, the actual work of forensic investigation, is meaningful to me in a way that goes past career. I help people prove things that were done to them. I help people say, in a legal and documented form, this happened, and here is the proof. That matters. It matters particularly to me because there was a version of my story where no one believed me, where the proof wasn't enough, where Mark walked away clean. I know how close it came to that. I am not entirely healed. I want to say that because I think the "and now I am whole again" ending is its own kind of lie. I have a habit. I'm working on it with a therapist named Carla who has no patience for my deflection, of not trusting people who are too consistently available, who are too attentive. When someone focuses on me too completely, some part of me goes very still and watchful, waiting for the angle. That is the residue of Mark, of 3 years of loving someone who was studying me. Carla says, the goal isn't to stop being affected by what happened. The goal is to understand the effect, so you can choose what to do with it. I'm working on it. Some days better than others. Last year, on the anniversary of the day I drove out of Portland, I set up a recurring annual donation to a financial fraud advocacy organization. They help people, mostly women, overwhelmingly women, who've had their identities and finances stolen by partners. The work is unglamorous and underfunded and genuinely important. I did it in my own name, not his. My name. This is mine. I have the company. I have the work. And this matters more than it might sound. Doing the work, the actual work of forensic investigation, is meaningful to me in a way that goes past career. I help people prove things that were done to them. I help people say, in a legal and documented form, this happened, and here is the proof. That matters. It matters particularly to me because there was a version of my story where no one believed me, where the proof wasn't enough, where Mark walked away clean. I know how close it came to that. I am not entirely healed. I want to say that because I think the "and now I am whole again" ending is its own kind of lie. I have a habit. I'm working on it with a therapist named Carla who has no patience for my deflection, of not trusting people who are too consistently available, who are too attentive. When someone focuses on me too completely, some part of me goes very still and watchful, waiting for the angle. That is the residue of Mark, of 3 years of loving someone who was studying me. Carla says, the goal isn't to stop being affected by what happened. The goal is to understand the effect, so you can choose what to do with it. I'm working on it. Some days better than others. Last year, on the anniversary of the day I drove out of Portland, I set up a recurring annual donation to a financial fraud advocacy organization. They help people, mostly women, overwhelmingly women, who've had their identities and finances stolen by partners. The work is unglamorous and underfunded and genuinely important. I did it in my own name, not his. My name. This is mine. Mark gets out in 2 years. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if I'll feel something when it happens. I might. I'm prepared for the possibility that I will feel something complicated and not particularly dignified, and that will be okay. What I know is this. He comes out at 45 with a federal record, no company, and a name that shows up immediately in news archives that are not going away. The world he wanted to be in, Silicon Valley, Forbes covers, IPO parties, that world has a very long memory for fraud. He will not be in it. I am 35. I have a company and a team and cases that matter, and a window in San Francisco where the afternoon light does something every day that makes me think, worth being here for, worth staying for. The homeless man at the St. John's Bridge, the one in the story I used to tell, with his neat line about chapters, I made him up. I'm sorry. There was no one at the bridge. I was alone. I stood at the railing, and the reason I stepped back was not wisdom or a sign or someone else's words. The reason I stepped back was small and undramatic. I thought about my mom staying on the phone while I cried, not saying anything, just staying. That was it. That was the whole thing. Sometimes the reason you're still here is just one person who stayed on the line. That's not poetry. It's just what happened. And it was enough.